undoubtedly bizarre enclosure wall, totally separate from the Temple of Jupiter. Each of these blocks weighs 900 tons.
For decades, historians have claimed to understand our world and seem to have explanations for everything. Well, everything but this one prehistoric phenomenon. Join us as we explore the Baalbek complex and its wonders. And we do have to tell you, it's unlike anything you've ever known. Baalbek is an ancient city located in the northeast of Beirut, Lebanon. After Alexander the Great conquered the city in 334 BCE, it was then ruled by the Romans and flourished under their rule. Now, the city is well known for the ruins of the Roman-era Baalbek temple complex, which includes two of the biggest and most imposing temples in history, the Temple of Bacchus and the Temple of Jupiter. But besides that, Baalbek is home to 6 massive Roman stone blocks that are so magnificent that pictures and clips could never do justice to just how majestic they are. The Baalbek stones are so incredible that many think they should count as one of the wonders of the world. They're thousands of years old, but they have never ceased to marvel and even confuse researchers who try to understand its mystery. Among these stones, 3 are a little smaller, but still enormous enough to make quite an impression to be known collectively as the Trilithon. These 3 blocks actually form part of the podium wall within the Roman complex dedicated to the Temple of Jupiter Baal, or Heliopolitan Zeus, which sits on top of Tel Baalbek. And yes, we know what you're thinking. The size and weight of these stones are unbelievable. Archaeologists say that each one of these structures weighs between 750 and 800 tons. So who exactly built these massive structures? And how was it possible to move such gigantic blocks around? The stones are said to be over 1,000 years old, which means that technology was only a fantasy at the time. So how were these things moved around? The weight of these stones isn't the only fascinating thing about them. The precision with which these stones were placed make the Baalbek stones one of the most impressive examples of ancient construction. So, who's responsible for these giant structures? Some historians have claimed that they were actually built by the Phoenicians. Some argue and say it was the Romans. But surprisingly, the pillars of this temple are actually crafted from a type of stone that naturally occurs only in Aswan, Egypt, which is about 150 miles away from Baalbek. Is there something about these stones that we have yet to find out? First, let's look at what we do know. The stone of the pregnant woman. The first is the stone of the pregnant woman, also known as the first monolith, which is still in the ancient quarry, sitting about 900 meters away from the Grand Heliopolis Temple complex. Although this stone is the smallest of the 3 massive monoliths at the site, it has become the most popular over the years, and this is because it's been well preserved. The angles at which it rests is also just incredible. It's unlike anything you'll ever see. Unlike the other stones, it has never been completely buried by the earth, which means that it has remained visible for centuries and drawn the attention of researchers, historians, and even tourists. In 1996, a geodetic team from the Austrian city of Linz visited the site to conduct precise topographic measurements. Their goal was to determine the exact measurements of the monoliths and explore whether they may have originally been intended for use in the construction of the enormous Temple of Jupiter nearby. They found that the rectangular stone block measures about 20.76 meters in length. At the base, the block is about 4 meters wide, but as you move upward, it expands to a width of 5.29 meters at the top, and in terms of height, the block stands at 4.32 meters tall. For density, it goes up to 2.8 grams per cubic centimeters, making it one of the heaviest quarried blocks known in ancient history. Now, there are multiple fascinating stories behind the name of the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. One popular tale says that the monolith was named after a clever pregnant woman who managed to trick the people of Baalbek. According to this story, she convinced the townspeople that she knew a secret method for moving the giant stone, but only on the condition that they would feed her well and continue providing for her until she gave birth. Another explanation for the name comes from ancient legends involving jinn, which are supernatural beings in Middle Eastern folklore. In this version, it's said that some pregnant jinn were assigned the task of cutting and moving the stone because only such magical beings would have had the strength and ability to work with a stone of this size. Locals, on the other hand, hold a very special belief about the stone, that a woman who touches it may experience an increase in fertility. For this second monolith, has an air of mystery to it. Stone of the South. The Stone of the South, which is also known as the second monolith, was rediscovered in the same ancient quarry during the 1990s. It has an estimated weight of 1,279 tons, surpassing the size and scale of the more famous Stone of the Pregnant Woman. There's actually a lot of confusion and controversy around its naming, as the exact location of this stone had been forgotten for centuries until it was mysteriously found again in the 20th century. As a result, some sources refer to the Stone of the South as an alternate name for the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, and so till date, many can never tell which stone is which. The dimensions of the Stone of the South are indeed astonishing, to say the least. It is estimated to be about 20.5 meters in length, a width of 4.56 meters, and a height of about 4.5 meters. Though some parts of it are buried in the ground, the Stone of the South is still magnificent. The next monolith of the Baalbek stones is even more astonishing. The Forgotten Stone. The Forgotten Stone, also known as the third monolith, was uncovered in 2014 by archaeologists from the German Archaeological Institute who were conducting research in the ancient quarry. Imagine their wonder when they found this unbelievable structure. This stone, with an estimated weight of around 1,650 tons, is considered one of the largest stones ever quarried by humans. As for its dimensions, the Forgotten Stone is about 64 feet in length. Its width is approximately 20 feet, and it stands at least 18 feet high. Now the big question is, why does this monolith, like the other stones, remain in its original quarry, still untouched by the construction projects it may have been intended for? What may have halted the work going on with these giant stones? For decades, these questions bugged the minds of historians, but before they could figure it out, came the discovery of the Trilithon. The Trilithon. The Trilithon, also known as the Three Stones, is a marvelous group of three horizontally placed giant stones that make up part of the foundational podium of the Temple of Jupiter Baal at Baalbek. These stones are set high up on a hill in a region referred to as Tel Baalbek and look just how dramatic but impressive it looks. Each one of these massive stones is approximately 19 meters in length, with a height of about 4.2 meters and a thickness of 3.6 meters. And just a few months after its big discovery, archaeologists also found another set of supporting stones right beneath the Trilithon. Each one is estimated to weigh around 350 tons, and they are approximately 11 meters wide. If you think about it, it is almost impossible to conclude that ancient builders from thousands of years ago possessed such an advanced understanding of construction. How were they able to grasp the craftsmanship required to assemble such heavy stones into something so precisely aligned? For context, stones as massive as the largest ones at Baalbek would require an incredible amount of modern machinery just to be lifted and transported. In fact, it would take about 18 modern heavy-duty cranes to lift a single stone of this size today. And that's not even accounting for the transportation challenges. Now imagine having to move nearly 100 columns of such weight and size. It would require a really large convoy of specially secured, heavy-duty trucks designed specifically to handle such extraordinary loads. Yet, we're supposed to believe history when it says that these stones were somehow moved over a distance of nearly 1,500 kilometers, back in an era long before the existence of paved roads, engines, or any of the sophisticated equipment that we rely on today. Think about it. There wasn't even asphalt to make the journey smoother, and no mechanical engines to assist with the task of hauling these stones over difficult roads. Could it have been manpower? Or did they have advanced machines that we still haven't found out about, and we're just underestimating them? The good news is, all of the questions do have answers. They're just so many that we don't know which to believe. Legends of the Baalbek stones. Some researchers and enthusiasts have come to various conclusions about the origins of the Baalbek temples, with most of them drawing these conclusions from the Bible as a history book. One of such conclusions is that they may have been built by people who were copycats of Noah. Maybe they were using a level of technological expertise similar to that which was supposedly used to construct Noah's Ark. Think about it. Noah's Ark is described in the Bible as being 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. By modern standards of measurement, that would make the Ark around 450 feet long, 70 feet wide, and 40 feet high. This size would give it an approximate volume of 43,000 cubic meters, which is almost about as long as a modern aircraft carrier. In total size and volume, Noah's Ark would be larger than any of the individual Baalbek stones, but in terms of weight, however, the Baalbek stones, especially the Forgotten Stone, are heavier than what the wooden structure of Noah's Ark would likely weigh. So in their opinion, if Noah could build the Ark, then lifting the Baalbek stones wouldn't be so hard. A little more weight won't hurt. Supporters of this theory often point to the appearance of the stones, which makes it seem as though they were abandoned in their original quarry or left unfinished on the construction site. This has led to the speculation that work on the Baalbek complex may have been abruptly stopped due to a significant, perhaps even catastrophic event. In fact, a researcher, David Urquhart, has suggested that the biblical flood described in the story of Noah could have been the very event that forced work on the site to cease. The builders might have been compelled to abandon their project as they prepared for or reacted to the coming of the flood, leaving the stones and their building plans unfinished. But Urquhart isn't the only with ideas about these magnificent stones. There have been countless other attempts to explain the origin of the Baalbek site and its megalithic stones. One such legend suggests that since the stones are enormous, they must have been handled and transported by giants, under the command of the powerful and often controversial biblical figure, Nimrod. Nimrod, as mentioned in the Bible, was often portrayed as a mighty ruler who always wanted to build something grand and almost impossible, especially to impress his rivals and other kings. According to another legend, the massive stones at Baalbek were part of a much larger project known as the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel as also described in the Bible, was a huge tower that humans attempted to build to reach the heavens. It's said that this project was halted by divine intervention, when God caused confusion by introducing different languages, which in turn scattered the people and stopped the construction work. Who knows? Maybe they left the stones behind. Some of the local legends surrounding the origin of the Baalbek site are even more fascinating. One version of the story suggests that Cain, the infamous biblical figure from the book of Genesis, was responsible for building the structure. According to this tale, Cain constructed the massive temple complex as a place to hide from the wrath of God. This theory is often tied to the idea that Cain, after committing the first murder by killing his brother Abel, sought refuge in this remote place to escape punishment from God. Yet again, another version of the story involves King Solomon, one of the most revered figures in the Bible. According to this version, Solomon, known for his wisdom and power, commissioned the construction of the Baalbek complex, but instead of relying on human labor alone, Solomon is said to have enlisted the help of jinns. Jinns are supernatural beings often associated with magical powers and ancient rituals, but the most fascinating thing about them is their ability to move massive objects with ease. So, they supposedly assisted Solomon in building a grand palace intended for the Queen of Sheba, a powerful and influential queen also mentioned in the Bible. But this is where historians say the story becomes quite ridiculous. It is said that the stones ended up where they are today because of an unexpected turn of events. The jinns went on strike. After a time, the supernatural beings supposedly grew weary or dissatisfied with the work and left the stones abandoned at the site. However, of all these theories and legends, only one seems to be backed up with some evidence. Mysterious graffito. For some archaeologists, there are too many signs pointing to the involvement of the Romans in the construction of the Baalbek stones, and luckily for them, they do have proof. When one of the Baalbek stones was being examined, researchers found something that was quite suggestive. It was an ancient mysterious graffito, which is a carved or written message left behind by one of the stonemasons who worked on the Temple of Jupiter. This graffito was found on top of one of the massive columns that sit directly on the Trilithon stones, and the writer also includes the date, specifically August 2nd, 60 CE. Now, this date has given historians a timeline with which to track this structure, meaning that there's every chance that the construction of the temple was likely nearing completion by that point. It confirms that the site was active under Roman rule and that skilled Roman stonemasons were indeed present and working on the project during the 1st century CE. This little piece of near evidence has come to align with other architectural details at Baalbek that are typical of Roman construction techniques and styles, such as the use of massive columns, carvings, and sophisticated engineering. Another strong piece of near evidence pointing to the Romans as the builders of the Baalbek temple complex is a sketch of the construction plan that was engraved directly onto one of the massive Trilithon stones. Historians believe that this sketch was left by Roman architects or builders. And how do they know this? The Romans are known for their meticulous planning and for documenting construction details in a way that would guide workers through the various stages of building. This sketch seemed to be doing the same thing and looked to have been an early blueprint of sorts, intended to help guide the construction of the enormous structures within the complex. But there's more. During the excavation of the temple, a shaft was dug in the middle of the structure. To the surprise of the researchers, they discovered the remains of the original settlement that existed before the temple was built. Under the temple's foundations, the archaeologists found various artifacts that dated back all the way from the Neolithic era through to the Iron Age. The fact that artifacts from such ancient times were found beneath the temple means that the settlement existed long before the temple was constructed. Given this, it's clear that the temple itself must have been built after the Iron Age. There simply isn't another reasonable explanation for these findings. The artifacts and their placement under the temple's foundations leave no room for doubt that the temple was indeed constructed after the period when these ancient settlements thrived. To top it all up, an architectural analysis conducted on Podium Ween, which is directly underneath the enormous Trilithon stones, has revealed some striking similarities with another famous ancient structure, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Scholars have noted that Podium Ween does not only share a general resemblance to the remains still visible at the Baalbek site, but also mirrors it in its precise proportions and measurements. The Temple Mount is a monumental construction of its own that was built by the Romans, and although it is believed to have been completed around 20 BC, it remains one of the most advanced engineering techniques of its time. The fact that Podium I aligns so closely with the Temple Mount in both appearance and structural details suggests that they do share an architectural style or influence, which was typical of Roman-era construction in the region. This similarity also supports the theory that the Baalbek complex, including Podium I, was constructed during the Roman period, following the architectural trends and techniques that were consistent with other major projects that the Romans embarked on around the Mediterranean. Now, there's only one problem. These details account for the involvement of the Romans in the Baalbek complex, but they do not address the means by which the stones were being transported. And that's where Graham Hancock comes in, and he's not having any of it. Graham Hancock's theory. Graham Hancock, a well-known researcher and author, has proposed an interesting theory about the Baalbek stones, which he has linked to an ancient, lost civilization. He refers to this civilization as the Old Civilization, and he believes that it existed around 12,000 years ago, which is much earlier than most other known civilizations. According to Hancock, this lost civilization was highly advanced and had access to sophisticated technology, which allowed them to build incredible structures, including the massive stone structures at Baalbek. One of the main reasons Hancock believes this is due to certain unusual features found in the stones at sites like Baalbek. For example, the stone-cutting marks and the way the stones just fit together with such precision that they look almost seamless. In Hancock's view, these precise cuts and perfect joints between the stones are far too excellent and must have used some kind of advanced technology. In fact, it could have been something as modern as laser cutting or other techniques that we still don't fully understand today. So what happened to this old civilization? Hancock believes that this old civilization and their technology was wiped out by a major global catastrophe. He says that the disaster might have been caused by a comet impact, which would have been powerful enough to cause massive destruction worldwide. And so, if this belief that he holds has some truth in it, the aftermath of this global disaster is that it set humanity back significantly and erased the advanced technology and knowledge that the old civilization had developed over thousands of years. In Hancock's view, the few survivors who made it through the disaster tried to preserve their knowledge and skills. He suggests that these survivors passed down the little that they knew to the new civilizations that emerged afterward. However, as generations went by, much of this advanced knowledge was either lost or forgotten. including the construction techniques once used at places like Baalbek, faded from memory. And so, the reason why we now struggle to understand how ancient sites like Baalbek were built is simple, because the knowledge and methods that made it possible were lost long ago. And Hancock did not stop there. He also went on to refute every claim that the Romans are responsible for the Baalbek site. We discussed earlier about the possibility that the Romans simply left these extraordinarily enormous blocks behind after discovering they could not be moved after they had been quarried. And quite frankly, that seems to be the most reasonable explanation. However, Hancock says it's far from it. He is not in any way convinced that the Romans built the massive stone foundation of the Baalbek temple complex. In fact, he argues that the Romans merely built their temple on top of an existing, much older platform that was already there. He says that the Romans were unaware of the existence of the stones, and when they arrived on the scene, they were most likely still buried beneath many meters of mud. And so, all they had to do was utilize the megaliths that were already present on the ancient and sacred site to eventually build the Temple of Jupiter. Let's face it, the Romans were pragmatic people who would not let labor that they had already done go to waste. And even if they did ditch the stones, wouldn't they have just cut those enormous blocks weighing more than 1,000 tons into smaller, more manageable megaliths to build the temple? But that's just what Hancock thinks. Sitchin's theory is almost unbelievable. Sitchin's theory. Theorist and historian Zecharia Sitchin has taken a completely different approach to explaining Baalbek, and he looks to ancient Sumerian records for answers, particularly the famous Epic of Gilgamesh. According to Sitchin, this ancient text tells the story of Gilgamesh, the legendary king of Uruk, and his quest for immortality. In the epic, Gilgamesh embarks on a journey to achieve eternal life, and it leads him to the mysterious site of Baalbek. Sitchin interprets the story to suggest that Baalbek was not just a simple temple or ancient structure, but actually a highly advanced spaceport. He claims that Gilgamesh traveled to Baalbek to board a Shem, which Sitchin describes as a type of rocket or spacecraft. This spacecraft, according to Sitchin's theory, would have taken Gilgamesh to the planet Nibiru, which Sitchin believes is the home of the Anunnaki, a group of powerful gods in Sumerian mythology. Gilgamesh wanted to reach Nibiru so he could gain the secret of immortality and live forever, just like the Anunnaki gods. Now, Sitchin believes Baalbek was actually a key location for launching spacecraft to and from Earth. As for the stones, he suggests that their enormous size and weight makes sense because the site was designed to support the heavy equipment and infrastructure necessary for space travel. According to Sitchin, the advanced knowledge needed to construct and operate such a site would have come from the Anunnaki, who shared their knowledge with humans, or maybe even built the site themselves. As bizarre as it sounds, many have held on to this theory, and others not quite. And so the historians who have pointed to the Romans have come up with more evidence, and the theory that remains most widely accepted amongst them is the capstan theory. How capstans moved the stones. Capstans, which were large mechanical devices, were used centuries ago to pull heavy objects with ropes. Over and again, they have been found in archaeological records, meaning that they were known tools used by ancient builders. Now, the capstan theory can be considered as the most convincing for several reasons, especially since it aligns with what we know about Roman engineering practices. One key piece of near evidence supporting the capstan theory is the presence of holes drilled into the massive stones at Baalbek. These holes show exactly where ropes were attached. which would have been a common method used by the Romans in their construction projects. By attaching ropes to these holes, the Romans could use the capstans and pulleys to move and position these massive stones more easily. In addition to that, if you look closely at the unfinished trenches that were dug out from the highest point of the stone, they give us an important clue about how it might have been moved. These trenches suggest that wooden rollers were likely placed underneath the stone as it was being moved forward. The use of these wooden rollers would have made it much easier to transport such a massive stone by reducing friction and allowing it to roll rather than being dragged. And according to calculations by experts, it would have taken about 16 capstans to move this enormous stone. Each capstan would have had 4 pulleys and would have required 32 men to operate. With this setup, they would have had the combined strength to move the massive stone forward. Interestingly, these construction techniques weren't only known to the Romans. Such methods were actually still in use even during the Middle Ages, meaning that the technology and knowledge required to move enormous objects like the stones at Baalbek had already existed for centuries. Take the Thunderstone, for example, holds the title of the largest stone ever moved by humans, and it's actually even heavier than the enormous Trilithon stones at Baalbek. In the 1770s, this gigantic stone was moved all the way from Finland to Russia, and this feat was accomplished using what tools? Capstans and wooden rollers. No advanced machinery whatsoever. In the same manner, the Russians also transported and erected the Alexander Column, a huge structure weighing around 600 tons without any heavy machinery. They relied only on manual tools and techniques similar to those likely used by the Romans and other ancient civilizations. With pieces of near evidence like this, historians may have been able to prove that even centuries ago, people were able to move and position enormous structures using traditional methods without relying on modern technology. The Baalbek complex is such a phenomenon that we may never get to the bottom of it anytime soon. In the meantime, we can only keep exploring its wonders. If you found this video fascinating, don't forget to like and share. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an adventure into the marvels of history. Let us know in the comments which part of Baalbek amazed you the most and where we should explore next.